So guess what? I'm talking about today. God's will. How many people here know with certainty what God's will is for them? Ooh, looks like I have some work to do. I have spent years trying to figure out what God's will for me was. I listened to my family. I looked around the world, and what I found was God's will, or what I was told was God's will for me is to go to college, to get married, and to start a family. So being the obedient child that I was, I went to college. I got married. I started a family. And I was miserable. Something was not right in my life. And so I was doing the outer things that people were telling me to do, and it wasn't really working for me. On the inside, I was in turmoil. I didn't like who I was and how I was in the world. I wasn't really being authentic for myself. So it took me a lot of time and a lot of money through therapy to understand who and how I was. And when I came to accept myself, then I could be my unique expression of God. I was able to understand that I didn't have to do what somebody else told me I needed to do. What somebody else said was God's will for me. You know, I think that's what parents do to try to control their kids. I've tried it with my son, it doesn't work. So I got to look at my beliefs about myself, about who I understood God to be, and what my place in the world was and is. And so I want to share with you today so that you will know for certain what God's will is for you by the end of this talk. Are you awake? You're ready, aren't you? Okay. In Living the Science of Mind, which is this whole month, or this whole year actually, we're using this book for many of our quotes in our talks. Living the Science of Mind, Ernest Holmes says, God's will for every person is happiness, peace, and joy. God's will for all creation is self-expression, since creation is an expression of this invisible cause which we call God. God is always being creative. God is always expressing. And we, too, made of God qualities here, are always expressing. And so that's what God's will for us is, to self-express. Now you may notice in this quote that self has a capital S. And some of you will remember, I hope, that last week I talked about the self with a capital S, meaning our spiritual self. That place where our consciousness joins with the God consciousness within us. It's our higher thoughts. It's where we're not laid into the human condition, but we are stepping into what we know is our oneness with God. And from that place, we can self-express the highest and best for our lives. Read the first sentence again. God's will for every person is happiness, peace, and joy. Do you have it? God wants you to be happy, wants you to be peaceful, wants you to be joyful. Are you? We are the only ones that can block God from us. God's will is always toward life and more life. Spirit wants us to enjoy our lives. We are made in the likeness and image of God. And I told you that that means a spiritual likeness and image, not a physical. God is not a physical being. but a spiritual being. And so, Spirit, God, wants us to enjoy our life and wants us to do anything that's going to give us more life. The caveat is that we're not hurting someone else in our actions. When we look at the God within, we get a clue as to what it is that Spirit wants for us. Living the Science of Mind again, it says every moment that a person is unhappy and unexpressed, they are tearing down their personality. Have you ever done that? Been so unhappy with yourself that you were beating yourself up? We're our harshest critics, aren't we? And so we can certainly beat ourselves up, give ourselves grief. It's deteriorating to our personality. It's not giving more life like it is that God wants us to do. He goes on to say, the moment one becomes inwardly contented, it builds up again. We're talking about our personality. The will of God is toward the more abundant life, because that life expresses God. We say God is all there is. And if we know that, we can embody that, we can believe it, then what are we expressing? We're expressing God in so many different ways. God is not just one way. That's why we talk about we honor all paths to God, because there are so many ways, so much diversity within Spirit itself. Just look into nature. How many types of plants are there? Birds, bees, animals, people. There's such rich diversity, and it's all God. And so when we try to limit God and say, this is the way God needs to be, or this is the way God is, we're limiting ourselves and our experience of life. So the will of God is toward the more abundant life, because that's what's going to express God. God is abundance. That's God's nature, and that's our nature. I want to use this song that Yes to Love sang this morning, because to me, this song explains the will of God for us. I met God's will on a Halloween night. He was dressed as a bag of leaves. The song goes on. The woman talks about how unhappy she is, how jaded she is with life. And then she meets this little boy who's struggling up her driveway on Halloween. And she opens her heart to his big smile. And her life is forever changed. The story goes on. The mother is working 2 jobs. There is no father on the scene. And so this woman starts to babysit when mom is working late. She is so touched by this little boy because of the way he shares himself and his love. He makes her laugh and her daughter laugh like they've never laughed before. Their lives are touched by him. He wants to pray before they eat their meal. And he prays for everybody except himself. You see, Will, that was the little boy's name, Will didn't see himself as having limitations. He was living life full out. He was doing everything he could do to help other people be happy, to be joyful, because that's what he knew within himself, happiness and joy. And he wanted to share that with others. He didn't see his life as limited. When we look at him from the outside, we would see limitation. He wouldn't get to do all the things that the other kids in the neighborhood would do. Well, let me tell you, Will was enjoying his life much more than many other people. He was sure about what he was to do. He was to give from his heart of love and share that. And that's why this song touches me so much, because he's moving past any physical limitations to share from that abundance of spirit that wells up within him, to share from his innocence the love that God has for everyone. Now, this is a country song, so you know it's not going to end well. He and his mother have to move to California, and the mother knows he's not going to live long. But she recognizes that each day she has with him is a gift. When he's leaving for this woman that has been caring for him and that he's enjoyed so much, and she has had her life touched, on notebook paper he writes in red crayon, God and me and God love you. He hands it to her before he gets in the car to take off. And she says, I never had a chance to tell him that he taught me the truth. The truth that God does love me. She was so jaded in her life that she wasn't able to see the love of God or feel that until this little boy showed up at her doorstep. But she was able to open her heart because of how he opened his heart. And it made a difference in her life. This is the will of God for all of us. To open our hearts to the love, the joy, and the peace that is there, waiting to be expressed through each of us. Living the Science of Mind again, it says, we do not honor God by being poor, weak, and unhappy, nor do we limit God by such experiences. What we do in our negative experiences is misdirect the positive energy that's already there. So that positive energy is within us. That is God living within us, and it wants to come forth. It wants us to share with other people, and it wants us to be gentle and loving with ourselves. When we can forgive ourselves for whatever it is, an attitude, a relationship, a past, and step into the fullness of God, that positive energy, then we can move forward. The now is the only time we have. So this is where we want to put our energy, is right here and right now in what we can do. The nature of God, the will of God, and the power of God are one and the same thing. That's a quote from Ernest Holmes. The nature of God, the will of God, and the power of God are one and the same thing. So if you're trying to figure out the will of God for you, don't let it flip you around. The will of God is to be the nature of God. And what do we know is the nature of God? That unconditional love, that peace, that joy, that creativity, that spontaneous living to life full out. That's what the will of God is for you. Now, it's going to look different for Gloria than it will for Dorothy. It's going to look different for Tom than it will for Troy. It's always going to be something different because we are each unique expressions of God. And isn't that marvelous? We don't have to be the same as everybody else. This passage goes on, and Ernest says, it matters not that countless millions of people through endless generations have misinterpreted the will of God and thought that it meant limitation and suffering. The nature of God is demonstrated when it's understood. So in other words, when we really understand the nature of God, this unconditional love, this joy, this peace, this excitement, this living life fully, creativity all the time, that's the nature of God. And when we understand that for ourselves, then we can fully express it. We can understand it and we can allow it to flow through us. Because that is our nature too. We are made in the nature of God. We saw that in God's will. The little boy, he was positive. He was showing all those God qualities, not concerned about himself, concerned about others, and trying to help other people live the best life, trying to make their life more joyful. God's will for us is to express life in a way that opens our heart and our soul, and help other people to open their heart and their soul. The will of God and the nature of God must be identical. Another quote from Ernest. The will of God and the nature of God must be identical. It's all God. And so God's will is always going to be more life, more abundance, more giving. That wasn't the message I had growing up. God's will was always more limited. Hold it down. Don't have too much fun. Don't think you're better than somebody else. Whatever that message was, I'm here to tell you, God's will for you is an abundant life. It's unconditional love. It's joy. It's peace. It's sharing yourself with others from that authentic place of who you are as a unique expression of the divine. I used to think that God's will was a specific plan. Now, yes, you can call me crazy. I can call myself crazy. But when I was coming into my 20s, going through college, trying to figure out what is God's will for me, what is it I'm going to do, I thought that God's will meant there was a specific plan out there, and I had to find this plan. God had one woman for me, and out of the millions of women in the world, I needed to find that one. And if I didn't find that one, my life was over. I was off track, off base, and that was it. That's a lot of pressure on somebody. That was the God outside of me that I thought had predestined my life. And so I had to go find what it is that God wanted me to do, and the right steps, and the right people, and the right places. And that I didn't have a choice in it. Guess what? We each have a choice in our life. Many choices, and it's up to us to choose. Woohoo! We don't have to find one predestined plan that God has for us, because we are made in God's image. So the will of God is just live your life, share your love, be peace, be joy, be wonderful in the world, because that's the good of God. And you express that however you want to express it. And it doesn't matter who you express it with or how you express it. You have free will. And you are the only one that can stop God from expressing. So my whole view of God has changed. My view of life has changed. And my view of my own responsibility for my life. I'm no longer the victim trying to find out what it is God wants me to do, where I'm supposed to go. Whoops, that's the wrong way. I know that I get to choose how I want to express Spirit in my life. And that's great. I think it is anyway. From Living the Science of Mind on page 136, it says, to the scientific mind, the will of God is manifest in the immutable laws of the universe. So Ernest is talking about the scientist here. Scientific mind. He wanted science and spirituality to walk hand in hand. For spiritual people to recognize the spiritual laws of the universe and how they always work for everybody, regardless of who they are. This is a very unique passage. I don't remember ever reading this. Marilyn, you can tell me afterwards if I've missed it somewhere. Or Dr. Byrne, you can tell me too. But I don't ever remember this next part being included in anything that Ernest has written. Because this verse goes on to say, to the overzealous religionist. Well, that's a little judgmental, isn't it? You don't usually hear Ernest being judgmental like that. And I think he's kind of poking fun here. To the overzealous religionist, the will of God appears to come through some special revelation, giving birth to a certain spiritual system of thought, which forever after is to be taken dogmatically and accepted without question. A truth, a faith, once and for all delivered. Ernest usually doesn't talk like that. Ernest welcomed all paths to God. I think he must have written this on a day somebody got on his last nerve. He was human, so I'm sure he had those days. But he recognized here that some people, and what he's saying, what these fancy words might mean, is some people will say in their zealousness, their joy of their religion, this is what God said. You have to go here. You have to walk around this temple 7 times to the right in order to have God's favor. You have to be baptized. You have to have it dunked in the water, not just sprinkled on your head. You have to sit under this Bodhi tree. This is where you'll find enlightenment. When we have those kinds of things, that becomes dogmatic. And Ernest did not want a dogmatic philosophy. He said, I know science is going to make more discoveries here. And so, as science unfolds more and understands more of God, have you read some of those articles about the God particle being found? You might want to check out Dr. Vernon's class on quantum physics that's coming up. When we see science unfolding more information about God, Ernest wanted us to develop the philosophy further. He said, I don't have a special revelation from God. God didn't speak to me and say, write this down. Ernest did his own work. He went through and looked and studied all these different religions to see what is that golden thread of truth. What is the commonality in all of these different religions? Turns out it was love each other. Love God. There is one God. Be true to yourself. Do no harm to others. Treat others as you would want to be treated. Those were the golden threads of truth. And that is the base philosophy for Ernest Holmes and Science of Mind. To live your best life. Not to be hurting others, but to expressing all you can. Look at the positive. Look at the good. And live from that place. I think it is interesting. Ernest Holmes, developing this philosophy, wrote a document called What I Believe. Now, a few weeks ago, Bob Collins read to us the document What We Believe by Ernest Holmes. Let me tweak that a little bit. Ernest Holmes wrote What I Believe. Because he said, I am the one that says this is what I believe. I can't tell you what you believe. You figure that out for yourself. But you know, he had a lot of followers. And we are human. And so they came through and said, dang, this is good. So we're going to just take this as ours. And they changed the word I to we. What we believe. And started reading it. And we still use that document, and it's pretty good. It's very good. Okay. But I challenge you, when you read that, when you hear that, see if it resonates for you. If there's a part of that that doesn't resonate for you, then don't pick it up. Don't take on that part. Because this should be something that resonates within your heart. The will of God for you is not a predestined plan. The will of God for you is to live fully, to express yourself in any and every way you can that is positive, that's good, that encourages your heart. I want to close by telling you how God lived and changed a life. Ivani Williams works at the Waffle House in a little Texas city. And Ivani, known as Nini to her friends and family, is working there to save money to go to college. She was at work one day. She was serving her customers, and there was an elderly gentleman there. I have trouble with this because it said he was 68. I thought, can you say 100? An elderly gentleman, and he mentioned as she was putting his food down that he had trouble with his hands. So without thinking about it, Nini took his plate, his fork, and his knife and cut up his hand for him. The woman that was sitting close heard this exchange, got out her phone and took a picture of this waitress, Nini, cutting up this man's hand. She posted it on Facebook because she was so touched by the compassion of this girl who didn't ask, do you want this? She knew it needed to be done, and so she just did it. Don't we all love to see compassion in action? So this woman was impressed. She took a picture. She put it on Facebook. Well, all of a sudden, Nini's friends started seeing her picture on Facebook. They tagged her on Facebook. And this started going viral. Nini got contacted by the president of Texas Southern University, who offered her a scholarship if she would come to his university. The mayor of the little town declared May the 8th of this year Ivani Williams Day to honor her and the compassion that she shows in the world. Her friends got behind this, created a GoFundMe page so that they could raise money for her to buy a car so she can get back and forth from her town to the university where she can go take classes. And she's registering to go to classes this fall, having the faith that the transportation will be there. Her life has been totally changed just by that one act of compassion. Are we willing to do compassion in this world with ourselves and with others? You never know how that just might change your life. We all love to see compassion in action. That's God's will for you. Live from your heart. Share from the love that you have within, the joy, the peace, the unconditional love that is God, your nature, your source, your spirit. Let us pray. I know that God is within each one of us, and God just can't wait for us to turn to itself and to live from that nature of abundance, that nature of joy and peace and unconditional love and creativity that is always welling up within us, waiting to be expressed by ourselves, by our bodies, by our minds, by our actions. And I know for each person here that each one is blessed and feels that Spirit moving within them this week as we go forth into this world to live that joy of God, to live that life that is God's will for each of us, to be excitement, to be joy, to be the wonder of God for the world to see and experience. And as we give that out, we receive that back through the law of circulation, and we are grateful. I release my word knowing that it unfolds perfectly for each of us. We are grateful, and together we say, and so it is.